Good morning, afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Dr. Luis Camacho, and together with my co-author, Maria Claudia Lovegrove, it is a pleasure to present our research titled Perceived Brand Globalness as the Key Driver of Foreign Apparel Purchase Intentions in Colombia. This study emerges from a broader interest in understanding how consumers in emerging markets navigate increasingly complex global consumption environments. In particular, we focus on the role of perceived brand globalness, that is, the extent to which consumers perceive a brand as being globally recognized and present, and how this perception influences their intention to purchase foreign apparel brands. What makes this research especially relevant today is the context in which these decisions occur. We integrate two critical dimensions: geopolitical uncertainty and consumer identity. As global tensions, economic shifts, and cultural dynamics continue to evolve, consumers are not only making functional decisions, but also symbolic and identity-driven choices. Using empirical data from Colombia, our study seeks to unpack how these forces interact and shape consumer behavior in the apparel sector, which remains one of the most identity-expressive industries. In the next few minutes, I will walk you through the theoretical foundation of our model, the methodology we employed, and the key findings that contribute to both academic literature and managerial practice. Let me begin with a brief overview of the research. Foreign apparel brands occupy a particularly salient position in emerging markets. However, despite their visibility and symbolic value, the factors that shape consumers' purchase intentions toward these brands remain conceptually fragmented in the literature. This study addresses that gap by integrating four key constructs into a single analytical framework: geopolitical uncertainty, consumer ethnocentrism, consumer xenocentrism, and perceived brand globalness. Our objective is to examine how these variables jointly influence purchase intentions toward foreign apparel brands in Colombia. Methodologically, the study employs a survey design with a sample of 425 Colombian consumers. We employ structural equation modeling to test the proposed relationships, allowing for a robust assessment of both direct and indirect effects. In terms of findings, the results are quite revealing. Perceived brand globalness emerges as the strongest direct predictor of purchase intention, reinforcing the importance of global brand perception in shaping consumer preferences. Interestingly, consumer xenocentrism does not have a significant effect, challenging some assumptions in prior literature about the automatic preference for foreign products. Finally, the empirical setting is particularly relevant. The Colombian foreign apparel market is not only dynamic, but also highly symbolic, making it an ideal context to study identity-driven consumption behaviors. To understand the relevance of our study, it is important to first reflect on why foreign apparel brands matter in emerging markets. Consumption in these contexts is not merely utilitarian, it is fundamentally symbolic. When consumers engage with foreign brands, they are not simply purchasing products. They are engaging with meanings related to identity, aspiration, and social positioning. This is particularly evident in the apparel sector. Fashion operates as a visible and expressive domain, where choices communicate lifestyle, prestige, and alignment with global cultural narratives. In this sense, foreign brands often serve as vehicles through which consumers project modernity and upward mobility. Moreover, consumers in emerging markets frequently interpret global and foreign brands as markers of superior status and cosmopolitan belonging. These perceptions are not accidental. They are shaped by historical, economic, and cultural dynamics that position foreignness as desirable or aspirational. Importantly, preferences for foreign apparel are not just about admiration. They reflect deeper processes of identity negotiation. Consumers are navigating tensions between local identity and global affiliation, particularly in contexts characterized by rapid market transformation and increased social comparison. This perspective provides the conceptual foundation for our study, as it highlights that purchase intentions toward foreign brands must be understood within a broader framework of symbolic consumption, identity construction, and contextual influences. Our framework is grounded in three complementary theoretical perspectives. First, uncertainty identity theory suggests that under conditions of ambiguity, such as geopolitical uncertainty, individuals seek stability through identity-affirming choices. Second, the theory of planned behavior provides the behavioral mechanism, explaining how beliefs and evaluations translate into purchase intentions. Third, consumer culture theory emphasizes that consumption is symbolic, meaning that brand choices reflect identity, status, and social meaning, rather than purely functional needs. Together, these perspectives allow us to explain how macro-level uncertainty, identity dynamics, and symbolic brand perceptions jointly shape consumer purchase intentions. Based on this framework, we formulate 4 research questions. First, we examine how geopolitical uncertainty influences ethnocentrism, xenocentrism, perceived brand globalness, and ultimately purchase intention. Second, we assess the extent to which perceived brand globalness directly explains purchase intention toward foreign apparel brands. Third, we evaluate whether ethnocentrism and xenocentrism exert direct or indirect effects on purchase intention. And finally, we test whether perceived brand globalness acts as a mediating mechanism, linking macro-level uncertainty and identity-based orientations to consumer behavior. This slide presents our conceptual model and the set of hypotheses guiding the study. At the center of the model is perceived brand globalness, which we conceptualize as the key proximal driver of purchase intention toward foreign apparel brands. We argue that geopolitical uncertainty functions as a macro-level contextual force shaping consumer identity orientations, specifically consumer ethnocentrism and consumer xenocentrism. These identity-based constructs then influence how consumers interpret and evaluate brands' globalness. In turn, perceived brand globalness directly drives purchase intention, capturing the symbolic and status-related value associated with global brands. The model includes a total of 13 hypotheses, covering direct, indirect, and sequential mediation paths. In particular, we test whether perceived brand globalness mediates the relationship between geopolitical uncertainty, identity orientations, and consumer behavior. Let me briefly outline the methodology. We employ a quantitative cross-sectional design, using an online survey administered in Spanish to ensure contextual and linguistic relevance. The sample consists of 425 adult Colombian consumers with prior experience in apparel purchasing, which aligns well with our study's focus. All constructs were measured using 5-point Likert scales, based on previously validated instruments, ensuring reliability and comparability with existing literature. For the analysis, we conducted confirmatory factor analysis, followed by structural equation modeling in AMOS, assessing both the measurement and structural models using multiple fit indices. This slide summarizes the sample demographics. In terms of age, the distribution is skewed toward younger consumers, with the majority aged 18 to 34. This is particularly relevant as younger segments tend to be more engaged with global fashion trends. Gender-wise, the sample includes 60% female and 40% male respondents, providing a balanced perspective with slight female representation. Regarding education, a significant proportion of participants hold bachelor's degrees, indicating a relatively well-educated sample. In terms of income, most respondents fall within the middle income range, which aligns with the target market for many foreign apparel brands. Overall, the sample reflects young to early middle-aged, educated consumers, a segment that is especially relevant for studying identity-driven and aspirational consumption. This slide presents the descriptive statistics and bivariate correlations among the study variables. In terms of central tendency, consumer xenocentrism exhibits the highest mean, whereas perceived brand globalness and purchase intention show comparatively lower values. All constructs demonstrate adequate internal consistency, with Cronbach's alpha coefficients ranging from 0.83 to 0.90, exceeding recommended thresholds. Turning to the correlation matrix, perceived brand globalness is strongly and positively associated with purchase intention. R equals 0.523, P 0.001, providing preliminary support for its central role in the model. In contrast, consumer xenocentrism does not exhibit a statistically significant relationship with purchase intention, suggesting a more nuanced or indirect role than previously assumed in the literature. Overall, these results offer initial empirical evidence that cognitive evaluations of brand globalness may exert a more direct influence on behavioral intentions than identity-based predispositions alone. This slide reports the results of the measurement model assessment. Overall, the constructs exhibit strong internal consistency, with composite reliability values exceeding the recommended threshold of 0.70. Regarding convergent validity, all average variance extracted, AVE, values exceed 0.50, indicating that the latent constructs adequately capture the variance in their respective indicators. Two items, PBG1 and CXEN01, were removed following reliability diagnostics to enhance measurement precision. With respect to discriminant validity, multiple criteria were employed. The Fornell-Larker criterion is satisfied, as the square roots of the AVE for each construct exceed the corresponding interconstruct correlations. Additionally, HTMT ratios remain below the conservative threshold of 0.85, with the highest value observed between geopolitical uncertainty and consumer ethnocentrism, yet still within acceptable limits. Furthermore, maximum shared variance, MSV values, are consistently lower than AVA across all constructs, providing additional evidence of discriminant validity. Taken together, these results confirm that the measurement model demonstrates adequate reliability and validity, supporting its suitability for subsequent structural model estimation. This slide presents the results of the hypothesis testing. Starting with the effects of geopolitical uncertainty, we observe a significant positive effect on consumer ethnocentrism and on perceived brand globalness, while its effect on xenocentrism is not statistically significant. Additionally, geopolitical uncertainty shows a direct positive effect on purchase intention, albeit of smaller magnitude. Turning to identity-based constructs, consumer ethnocentrism exerts a significant positive effect on perceived brand globalness, but does not have a direct effect on purchase intention. In contrast, consumer xenocentrism does not exhibit significant effects on either perceived brand globalness or purchase intention. Most notably, perceived brand globalness demonstrates a strong and highly significant effect on purchase intention, confirming its central role in the model. Overall, the findings suggest that the influence of macro-level uncertainty and identity orientations is primarily indirect, operating through perceived brand globalness rather than exerting direct effects on consumer behavior. This slide highlights the central finding of the study. Perceived brand globalness emerges as the strongest direct predictor of purchase intention, with a substantial and highly significant effect. Importantly, this effect surpasses that of geopolitical uncertainty, and both identity-based constructs, ethnocentrism and xenocentrism, neither of which demonstrates comparable explanatory power in the direct prediction of purchase intention. This finding suggests a critical theoretical implication. Consumer preference for foreign apparel brands is not driven by foreignness per se, but rather by the perception of global recognition, legitimacy, and prestige associated with those brands. In other words, what matters is not simply that a brand is foreign, but that it is perceived as globally established and symbolically valuable within the consumer's social and cultural framework. This slide presents the results of the mediation analysis. The findings provide strong evidence that perceived brand globalness serves as a significant mediator in the model. Specifically, the indirect effects of geopolitical uncertainty on purchase intention, both directly through perceived brand globalness and sequentially through ethnocentrism and perceived brand globalness, are positive and statistically significant. Similarly, consumer ethnocentrism exhibits a significant indirect effect on purchase intention via perceived brand globalness, reinforcing its role as an upstream identity-based driver. In contrast, consumer xenocentrism does not demonstrate a significant indirect effect, further confirming its limited explanatory power within this framework. Overall, these results support the argument that the impact of macro-level uncertainty and identity orientations on consumer behavior is largely transmitted through cognitive evaluations of brand globalness, rather than through direct pathways. This slide highlights the nuanced role of geopolitical uncertainty in our model. First, regarding the effects of geopolitical uncertainty, we find that it has a significant positive effect on consumer ethnocentrism, perceived brand globalness, and purchase intention. This suggests that, under conditions of instability, consumers do not simply withdraw from global consumption. Instead, they appear to recalibrate their evaluations, placing greater emphasis on brands perceived as globally established and legitimate. From an interpretive standpoint, this indicates that global brands may function as symbols of stability, resilience, and certainty in uncertain environments. However, regarding what geopolitical uncertainty does not do, it does not significantly influence consumer xenocentrism. In other words, instability does not reduce admiration for foreign products. It simply does not activate it. This finding challenges more simplistic assumptions that uncertainty uniformly suppresses foreign-oriented consumption. Rather, the evidence suggests a more selective, cognitively mediated response, in which consumers rely on perceived brand globalness as a heuristic for navigating uncertainty. This slide focuses on the role of consumer ethnocentrism as an indirect mechanism. Our results show that ethnocentrism is significantly activated by geopolitical uncertainty and, in turn, positively influences perceived brand globalness. However, its direct effect on purchase intention is not statistically significant. This suggests that ethnocentrism does not lead consumers to directly reject foreign apparel brands. Instead, it reshapes how consumers evaluate those brands, particularly in terms of their symbolic strength and global standing. In other words, ethnocentric consumers appear to rely more heavily on brand-level cues, such as global recognition and legitimacy, rather than on domestic versus foreign distinctions. Importantly, this pattern is consistent with prior research, including CAMACHO et al. 2022, which also found no direct effect of ethnocentrism on purchase behavior under conditions of heightened uncertainty. Overall, the findings reinforce the idea that ethnocentrism operates indirectly, influencing purchase intentions through perceptual and evaluative processes rather than direct behavioral resistance. This slide highlights one of the more unexpected findings of the study, the non-significant role of consumer xenocentrism. Contrary to prior literature, xenocentrism does not have a significant effect on perceived brand globalness or purchase intention, nor does it serve as a response to geopolitical uncertainty. From a theoretical standpoint, this suggests an important distinction. While xenocentrism may reflect a symbolic admiration for the foreign, this orientation does not necessarily translate into behavioral intention, particularly under conditions of uncertainty. In other words, xenocentric tendencies may persist at the attitudinal level, but become behaviorally weak when identity protective or risk-related concerns are more salient. In the Colombian foreign apparel context, our findings indicate that purchase intention is driven less by a generalized preference for foreignness and more by the perceived global legitimacy of brands. Overall, this reinforces the idea that xenocentrism is highly context sensitive, and its influence cannot be assumed to be uniform across markets or conditions. This slide synthesizes the findings into a coherent narrative. First, geopolitical uncertainty serves as a trigger, activating consumer ethnocentrism and, to a lesser extent, directly influencing purchase intention. Second, consumer ethnocentrism strengthens perceptions of brand globalness, functioning as an indirect mechanism rather than a direct driver of behavior. Third, consumer xenocentrism shows no significant effect on either perceived brand globalness or purchase intention, highlighting its limited role in this context. Finally, and most importantly, perceived brand globalness emerges as the central driver of purchase intention, serving as the key mechanism by which contextual and identity-based factors translate into consumer behavior. Taken together, the model suggests that purchase intention toward foreign apparel brands is not driven by foreignness alone, but by the extent to which brands are perceived as globally legitimate, prestigious, and symbolically valuable. In this sense, geopolitical uncertainty does not suppress global consumption, it reconfigures it, shifting consumer reliance toward globally recognized brands as signals of stability and status. This slide outlines the key theoretical implications of the study. First, our findings position geopolitical uncertainty as an active consumer-level force, rather than merely a macroeconomic background condition. It directly shapes identity orientations and evaluative processes involved in consumption. Second, the results highlight perceived brand globalness as the central mechanism in the model. It operates as the most proximal determinant of purchase intention, linking both contextual factors and identity-based constructs to behavioral outcomes. Third, we observe asymmetric identity effects. Consumer ethnocentrism and xenocentrism do not function as opposing forces. Under conditions of uncertainty, ethnocentrism becomes more salient, albeit indirectly, while xenocentrism remains structurally weak and behaviorally non-influential. Collectively, these insights contribute to a more nuanced understanding of how context, identity, and symbolic brand perceptions interact in emerging market consumption. This slide presents the key managerial implications and study limitations. From a managerial perspective, the findings suggest that foreign apparel brands should move beyond emphasizing mere foreignness and instead focus on global recognition, international legitimacy, and symbolic prestige in their positioning strategies. Importantly, geopolitical uncertainty does not diminish the appeal of foreign brands. On the contrary, it may increase consumer reliance on globally established brands as signals of stability and trust. At the same time, firms should integrate global positioning with locally resonant elements to mitigate potential identity-based tensions associated with ethnocentrism. In terms of limitations, the study is cross-sectional, which limits causal inference. Additionally, the focus on a single country and product category limits the generalizability of the findings. These limitations open avenues for future research, particularly through longitudinal designs, cross-country comparisons, and behavioral data. To conclude, this study demonstrates that in the Colombian foreign apparel market, perceived brand globalness is the primary driver of purchase intention. While geopolitical uncertainty strengthens ethnocentrism and influences brand perceptions, xenocentrism does not play a significant structural role. This suggests that consumer behavior is shaped less by a generalized preference for the foreign and more by perceived global legitimacy and symbolic value. In terms of future research, several directions emerge. First, comparative studies across Latin American markets would help assess the cross-cultural robustness of these findings. Second, extending the model to other product categories could clarify whether the limited role of xenocentrism persists beyond apparel. Third, longitudinal designs would allow us to better capture how geopolitical uncertainty dynamically reshapes consumer identity over time. Finally, further research should explore interaction effects involving perceived brand globalness, particularly in relation to country of origin cues, luxury positioning, and national identity salience. Thank you, and we look forward to debating and amplifying the discussion about these extraordinary academic topics.